5.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this world of ours. I truly hope you're safe and sound. I'm Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and welcome to Carnegie Connects, a series of conversations about issues of critical importance to America and to the world. Today, I'm delighted and honored to welcome to the program Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister and Defense Minister of the State of Israel. He needs no introduction. His career has spanned decades, heavily focused and involved in military, security, and politics, serving as Chief of Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, Prime Minister, 1999 to 2001, Defense Minister, and head of the Israeli delegation to the Camp David Summit in July of 2000. Today, he's in the forefront with his fellow citizens, defending Israeli democracy, in the face of government efforts to overhaul and undermine the independence of the Israeli judiciary. Mr. Prime Minister Ehud Barak, I want to welcome you to Carnegie Connects. It's great to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
You know, it seems clear to me that, I think it's fair to say that 75 years after the creation of the State of Israel, neither the borders nor the identity of the nation are yet settled. That's not unusual for a young country, even one with an ancient past. 75 years after our independence in 1851, neither the borders nor the identity of the American Republic were fixed. And that was 9 years before a transformative civil war that would fundamentally change the country and produce a different trajectory. But as you know more than anyone, Israel is not America. Israel does not live in a non-hostile environment, nor does it have the luxury of two oceans. What one historian brilliantly described, I wish it had been me, as our liquid assets, which provide extraordinary security and explain a lot about the way Americans behave abroad. Those oceans also afforded us the time and space to work through our problems. So many challenges your country faces today. I want to begin on the issue of what's happening in the streets of Israel. You've quoted, and I'll allow you to quote her, I think it would be better coming from you, Supreme Court President Esther Hayut, who will resign, I guess, retire in October. What did she say about the current efforts at, quote, judicial reform, unquote?
You know, the new government, legally elected, stated it during the campaign and immediately afterwards. We have 4 objectives. Iran, breakthrough with Saudi Arabia, shortage of housing, cost of living. They never mentioned this judicial reform. When they started judicial reform, the Supreme Court chief, Lady Esther Hayut, she said, this is not a judicial reform. This is an explicit attempt to crush the independence of the Supreme Court and to push Israel out of the family of democracy. And I add to it that Americans sometimes do not know. In Israel, there is no constitution, no checks and balances, no 2 layers, House and Senate, no veto of the president, no filibuster. There is nothing whatsoever. The only protection of our kind of democracy is the independent Supreme Court. And when the government tries to destroy it, that's a real challenge, and there is a counter-revolution, counter-movement that stood up the protest to block the government and until now successfully blocked it from crossing the line.
You know, you've said repeatedly that Israel is not going to turn into Hungary or Poland, or worse, I think at one point you said into a dictatorship. Why are you so confident that the protests in the streets are actually going to succeed and block the government's efforts to create this judicial revolution?
First of all, I know our people, and the protest developed much beyond my best kind of expectation or wishes. It grew very fast, crossed the threshold, the academic kind of threshold of successful civil resistance, according to Columbia kind of research that covered hundreds of cases from 1900 until 2006, and found a common denominator where 3.5% of the overall population, about 7 or 8% of the adult population, tenaciously, determinedly keep striking or running civil nonviolent disobedience. The government either capitulate or falls. And we have all the reasons to believe that it will happen in our case as well.
Do you think the Prime Minister, I want to ask you about Mr. Netanyahu in a minute. Do you think the Prime Minister has been constrained and understands now that if he should push forward with judicial reform, any aspect of it, and I know there's one bill on judicial selection, which simply needs a second and third reading in the Knesset in order to pass. Do you think on this issue he's simply delayed or paused and he's still serious, or members of his government are still serious about pushing this ahead?
I think the two aspects of it are right. First of all, he was blocked by the protest, and basically realized the two elements went out of his control. Number one, the economy. The world economy responds very harshly to this reform. And second is the protest, the size of the protest, and the fact that it included essential elements of our operational capacity. Our reserve pilots who fly every week, they fly many reservists in the service of our operational activity, cyber warriors, special forces, and the like. He cannot operate Israel between major wars in a routine without those people, and that's create a deterrence. So he understands they cannot do it. And the other thing, it became clear that with the backing of the protest, if he tries to pass this legislation, the ones that you mentioned, or any other of the seven kind of laws that had been cooked for final approval, the Supreme Court will cancel it, and suddenly we are in a constitutional crisis without constitution. The torch passed to the gatekeepers, the head of the Secret Service, head of police, chief of the armed force, and head of Mossad. These guys might face contradicting orders from their superior ministers, they're under the government, and orders do or not do from the Supreme Court. And I have no doubt that in Israel, they will follow the Supreme Court. And that will create a crisis, but a crisis which might create an opportunity as well, in a kind of a constitutional moment when it's clear that it cannot continue this way. Of course, Netanyahu now takes what I call the Kaczynski tactic. He realized that he cannot do it now, so he wants a pause. He wants to kind of to calm things down, that in a way that the wind in the sails of the protest will go down, and that's exactly what Kaczynski done. He faced a massive demonstration in Warsaw. He guided the president to veto certain law that his own people, Kaczynski people, put on the table, and everyone had a sigh of relief. He waited patiently for 15 months before he found the right moment and moved forward and make Poland de facto dictatorship. You call it illiberal democracy. I prefer to make it clear. In Israeli case, it's de facto dictatorship because there is nothing but the independence of Supreme Court to stand between us and all powers in the hands of the executive branch and the men at the top of it.
Right. I mean, the severity of the threat, which you just identified, is that unlike this system, in which there are not just an independent judiciary is a check, you have the prospects of a presidential veto, you've got a written constitution with a Bill of Rights, and you have a bicameral legislature, a House and a Senate. You have none of these things, because there are many people, as you know, who say, what's wrong with judicial reform? Every Supreme Court, every judicial system needs judicial reform. So what's all the shouting about? I mean, isn't this a natural process for any democracy? And if you have a government that has a majority, why shouldn't that government be allowed to basically pass any law it wants? You know, that's the criticism.
Yeah, look, so first of all, I already mentioned it. When the independence of the Supreme Court is the only kind of block to de facto dictatorship, we have a good reason to make sure that it's not hurt in any way. But basically, we say the following in Israel. A government can decide on a peace, sign a peace. It can declare a war. It can change, it can decide when and how to build infrastructure. It can make many things. It cannot change unilaterally the rules of the game of the democratic system. In America, if someone has to change the rules of the game, he has to change the constitution, he has to get 2/3 of every bicameral kind of layer. They need to get 3/4 of the parliament of 50 kind of states.
Right.
It's tough. You cannot do it. In Israel, you can do it over half a working day of the Knesset if there is no independence. So we say the following, especially the pilots say, we are ready to serve a democratic government, to risk our lives, sometimes to bury our comrades. And even if we do not agree with the policies, even the policies behind the concrete operation that we are executing now. But we won't serve, and we cannot serve a dictator or dictatorship. And we don't make this nuanced observation. For us, anything which is not democracy is de facto dictatorship, because we don't have all these checks and balances.
Is there any prospect of President Herzog? I know he's been involved in trying to figure out a way to develop a compromise. Is there any merit and or hope for that track that he's trying to run?
I believe, and I warned him personally and publicly, no way to bridge here. There is no symmetry here. You know, it is dealt and defined somewhat as if it was kind of a neighbor's kind of debate on some petty issue.
Yes.
It's on one hand, it's a power that for personal reasons, it's not ideology, it's personal reasons of defendant in a criminal court, another convicted one, another ultra-Orthodox who want more money for their separate life, and some lunatics, kind of racist, messianic lunatic. Everyone has these issues, and they try to destroy democracy, as Chief Justice Ehud put it. Destroy the independence of court, destroy democracy. And on the other hand, there is those who fight for democracy. So there is no meeting point between those who want to protect the independence of the Supreme Court and those who want to destroy it. Yes. There is no place for, so it's clear that it's going to nowhere. But who gains from it? Netanyahu, because it gives him more time. He's like a boxer who just almost got a knockout. He's out on the ropes. He needs his trainer. He needs all these cold pieces of day. He needs, if he could pay and get 15 minutes of rest, he would give everything for it. But he can't. It's our role of the opposition, role of the protest, to make sure that those people who were involved in trying to make this, to impose this regime change from top down, using the very tools that democracy provides and the very freedom that it allows, in order to destroy it from within, they cannot stay in power. So I think the demands of the protest should be clear. Not just stop legislation, cancel, pass a resolution in the Knesset that cancel all these amok-running kind of legislation.
Yes. And
only then we can start a new chapter. And I add to it, those who were involved, basically it's Netanyahu himself, it's the two lunatic Messianic Michiganers, and the legal team, Rotman and Levin, Minister of Justice, and the head of the committee. they should be pushed out of the centers of power because we cannot trust them that they will not use the next opportunity to do the same.
Right. I wanted to ask you about Mr. Netanyahu. You were his commander in the military.
Yeah.
You served in
he was a young soldier and later on young officer under my command.
Right.
And his elder brother, the one who killed in Entebbe, was my best friend and my deputy in the same unit.
So you've known him most of your political life. Some people think he's changed, that the risk-averse, cautious Benjamin Netanyahu, for any number of reasons, has changed. Do you share that assessment? And why?
Yeah, for sure. Even you and me, I know you, I know him more than 50 years, I know you 20, I know myself for almost 80 years.
That can't
I'm
be.
over 80 now, but I cannot remember I said before.
That can't be. It's hard to
So
imagine.
basically all of us changed, but he changed dramatically under the circumstances, especially from 2015 on, and in a more dramatic pace in the last 4 or 5 years. And he's now, and probably he doesn't feel it. He doesn't feel any cognitive dissonance. For him, he's the same man. But basically, he became so focused on his criminal court case, because in Israel, 97% of criminal court cases ended up with a verdict guilty. There are no juries. You cannot make psychology. It's all about facts and professional discussion. So basically understand that he had a very bad situation there. He should find a way to stop it. So he made an unholy alliance with others who have their unique, sometimes personal problems, and they try to impose their will and disrupt the whole system just to save themselves. He changed dramatically. He doesn't understand. He doesn't feel this way. He still feels the savior of the country, but he's not there anymore. In fact, I mentioned more than once that if Israel were the United States, we probably would contemplate the 25th Amendment, but as I mentioned, we don't have the Constitution, can do nothing but to tell the public that to the best of our judgment, we know him, we know the job of Prime Minister, he does not fit as of now to serve as the chief executive of the State of Israel.
Yeah. I want to shift gears if we could. Well, just to close out the issue of these protests. Your answer to the question, what will end this, is basically a new government. Is that fair?
No, it's not a fair description. Of course, I would not regret the change in government, but our job is, first of all, to cancel those blitzkrieg of legislation, some 7 or 8 laws. Secondly, I say that the people who are involved, Netanyahu and those 2 couples, the judicial couple, Rotman Levin, and the lunatic couple, Ben-Gvir Smotrich, should be removed in order not to give them opportunity to try it again, this attempt on the life of our democracy. But in Israel, under the system, it can happen without having new election. It's enough if one party of his coalition leaves, it's a new situation. If people, as a result of his free-falling numbers in the polls, lose trust of him and his parties from within his own party, if, for example, just next week, in the next 10 days, if 5 people of his party will not vote for the budget that he has to pass next week, it's new election. But if they do some other trick and do not vote in other, it can be between 2 Knesset, 2 major elections, the government could change several times. It's unlike the American system. And so there are many ways. So I don't try to aspire to put the bar at we have to remove the government. We have to make sure that those who try to destroy democracy will not be there because they might try it again.
Fair enough. Let's move now to a second issue, and that is what to do about Israel's occupation and relationship with the Palestinians. again, quoting you, I think, you have 15 million people living between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. If Palestinians were half of those roughly, I don't know the exact numbers, but if you were to grant voting rights to those Palestinians, you would not have a Jewish state. And if you don't grant voting rights to those Palestinians, then you won't have a democratic state, or worse, So if someone were to ask you, Ehud Barak, and obviously this was much on your mind in July of 2000, when you, as well as myself and President Clinton were at the Camp David summit. People talk now about one state. I'm just curious, not that we can produce this now, but what is the best outcome to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in your view?
It was and remain the same. You accurately put your finger on the most important element. The present situation leads to nowhere. If only one political entity reigns over this whole area, if they can vote, it's a binational state, and within very short time, historically speaking, a binational state with Muslim majority. That's not the Zionist vision, and the same applies to the other. If they cannot vote permanently, we also always say it's temporary, but it's temporary for 55 years. It's a two-generational. That cannot honestly define as temporary. So basically, if they cannot vote, it's no democracy or worse, as you said. You described it perfectly. So those who argue for one state, if they're Israelis, they are blinded by messianic visions or by over hubris or by whatever. They are blinded. We are going to know. If they are Palestinian, that might be a clever step. They might say, why the hell to quarrel with this Israel? They are too strong and they can defeat us. Why not just to say, oh, no, we don't want anything. We want one state. We only one request from the international community. One person, one vote. Mm. No, it's a deadlock. So the real decision should be, we should never lose sight of the two-state solution. That's the only way to solve it. Two-state solution, namely the delineated line, we already delineated, try to delineate more than once, within the promised land, where we have 85% of the settlers and all strategic installations that we need, but that cover no more than few percent of the area of the West Bank, living deliberately or having this place for us with a majority, Jewish majority for generations to come, and allowing a demilitarized, viable Palestinian state develop on the other side and hopefully living in peace with us and with other neighbors. And it's not right probably today. I think that we cannot fight the same moment for democracy in Israel and for a proper solution for the Palestinians, because some of the coalition that you create to reach majority of the protests, including people who are right-wingers like Gideon Saar or Elki or Lieberman, they're more to the right than Netanyahu, but they all about for the rule of law and for democracy and for the right value. So we need, first of all, to make sure that we are democracy, because if we are dictatorship, we won't be able ever to raise the right solution for the Palestinians. And once we solve it, we should go back and try. It's good for Gaza, it's good for the West Bank, it's good for the efforts to make them together. It doesn't make sense. 3 states for two people.
Yes.
And that's the only solution. It never changed. I said at the end of Camp David, when the time will come, take it 15 or 50 years, you will need magnifying glass to see the difference between what we had on the table at Camp David or later on in Annapolis, and what will be the final agreement when it comes. Only tragedy is that we won't be able to explain to ourselves, the Palestinians, to the world, why the hell we had to bury so many people on both sides and to stretch this tragedy over several generations before we came to grip with the realities, as you described them, and find a solution.
But what do we do now in order to preserve? I agree with you on this issue. Separation through negotiations, I think, is the only thing that solves the demographic problem, the political problem, the psychological problem, and meets the national aspirations of Palestinians and preserves Israeli security.
I think that
the question is, what do we do? How do you preserve that option? What would Israel have to do to preserve it, and what would the Palestinians have to do to preserve it?
I think Palestinians are short of perfect. They probably bear more than 50% of responsibility, but that doesn't matter because we have to look first of all on our role in it. I think that Israel should be actively trying to strengthen the Palestinian Authority and weaken the Hamas. On the face of it, it seems that we are doing the opposite.
The opposite, yes.
Our government acts as if they want to weaken the Palestinian Authority, which still, they're short of perfect, but they work daily for us to reduce the level of terror. They save a lot of Israeli life by their collaboration or cooperation with us, in spite of the fact that they do many bad things. And Hamas they're murderers. There's no way even to start a negotiation with them, not because they can aspire to destroy Israel, but because they sow hatred in the Palestinian mind and cause almost continuously a security problem. So we had to weaken them and strengthen Hamas. How can we weaken them? Not necessarily by throwing bombs. We have to find a way to support Arab and international support, and with some Israeli kind of allowances to create more jobs in Gaza, to find a way to give them a port, control the supervise on security issues, that a seaport and an airport, they shouldn't be dependent upon the Egyptian for any human being go out of there, and of Israel or any container coming in. That's crazy. It doesn't serve us. So we have a need. And even Likud, leading Likud ministers, proposed more than once what our Secret Service and our COGAT, the operation that coordinates government operation vis-a-vis the territory, they always propose this kind of positive steps to reduce the level of suffering in Gaza and strengthen the Palestinian Authority. It would serve Israel much better than the de facto apparent behavior of the government, which seems to do the opposite.
I mean, this government couldn't lay out a political horizon, but would that be necessary if you had a government that was interested in resolving this problem?
You know, when we, both of us and many other American Israelis dealt with the peace, we had tailwind for peace from about 1991 until probably 2011. There were some 20 years that there was tailwind. There is no such a tailwind. The world, including the United States, gets tired of trying to solve it, and that doesn't help. On the other hand, we are in no position to demand from the rest of the world to do more than our own government is ready to do. So it's a tragedy, and the Palestinians also deteriorate into kind of a distrust of what happened. And you know, all over the world, you see the phenomena that the public's losing trust both in the competence and integrity of the political leadership on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. So it's not easy. It will take patience, but we have the most important is not to lose sight, not to turn into kind of despair. It cannot be solved. The Arabs are the same Arab, the sea is the same sea, nothing could be done. It's not true. Every moment it could be done. It needs leadership, the same sense of timing, and the courage to take decision and the strength to execute them.
Yeah, it's about leadership, I think.
Yeah.
We would both on both sides. Let's turn now, because there are a few more subjects I wanted to get your views on, to Iran. You've said in a number of places that Iran is either close to or already a nuclear weapons threshold state. That is to say, it knows how to, it has enough fissile material, it knows how to assemble the physics package, the warhead. Maybe it's a screwdriver's turn away. If that is the case, how do you process, how does Ehud Barak look at the problem, the challenge of the Iranian nuclear program?
I have to make a little bit more accurate your description. They don't have yet, it's not a screwdriver. They still need a year and a half probably to learn how to deal with the metal form of uranium and how to pack it into small enough weapon that will fit into the warhead of a missile. But that's something that we cannot control and we will not be able to influence decisively. So basically, in this sense, they're already there as a threshold nuclear state. They have no incentive to announce it because they will get more sanctions. The administration does not have any incentive to announce it because the question will come: why the hell you allowed it to happen? What are you going to do? So both sides kind of put it on backseat. But the reality is that only the Iranians will decide when they start to break through toward embryonic arsenal, and we cannot block them from doing this. So basically, they are following the footsteps of North Korea, let's say. But even North Korea never thought of dropping a bomb on South Korea or Japan or America in Guam. It's basically about the survival of the dynasty in Pyongyang. Yes. And about the room of kind of freedom for maneuvering in their own area. But why though? Because they're fanatic but not stupid. They don't want to go back to the Stone Age. And the same applies to the Iranians. So it's not about the destroying Israel with a bomb. It's about NPT. NPT might be broken if Iran turn nuclear, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt will turn nuclear, any second-grade dictator on his own choice might turn nuclear, and that starts a process that once Graham Ellison of Harvard described as the kind of cascade toward the nuclear terror. Namely, at a certain point, if there are 30 players on Earth, one of them will find himself with a crude device stolen by a terror group that might send it to New York, to Rotterdam, or to Ashdod in Israel. But that's the challenge for the next 30 years, and by then you will have those gates through which every vessel will go very slowly, and you will know for sure if there is any radioactive elements in it.
I mean, if Ehud Barak were Prime Minister of Israel today, what would your approach to Iran be?
I would be kind of frustrated for what had been missed in 2015 by Netanyahu, the grandiose attempt to intervene in American politics, the Obama regime, and then his over-initiative and enthusiasm about leaving the JCPOA by Trump. It were two grave mistakes, but into the reality, I would try to think how to make sure the Iranians fully understand why they should not even consider using a bomb against Israel, deepening the cooperation with the United States, reaching a better intelligence cooperation to know when they start to move. Probably will be found some opportunity to slow them down somewhat, and to equip Israel with the proper means to be able to act independently. Because if there is one thing is for sure, when Iran will decide to step forward toward announcing that they have nuclear capability, it will do it when America is paralyzed, be it in Venezuela, in Ukraine, in Senkaku Island, in Taiwan, or in Interregnum. They will not do anything. So only Israel can respond. But it cannot respond effectively if the nature of relationship is what we have now, with Netanyahu. And if there is no intimate understanding that each side understands the constraints and the sensitivities of the other side, it needs maturity and depth of relationship that it seems to me that Netanyahu cannot create, neither with Biden administration and probably not even with whoever comes from the Republican side, if he's a serious person.
Yeah, I'm assuming, and maybe I shouldn't assume, that you believe there is no military solution. That is to say, yes, Israel could strike Iran. The question is whether that would only delay the program or maybe even accelerate their efforts to acquire a weapon. I mean, is that fair?
Yeah, I think that you describe it accurately.
Yeah.
Israel Air Force is very capable. If the government will order it to attack certain installations, they will attack and probably destroy it. But it's not really relevant to the nuclear military plan of Iran. Right. Because if we will hit any installation which relates to the Iranian nuclear industry, it might accelerate it. Because they will tell, oh, you Americans, you unleash your nuclear dog onto us, onto our peaceful nuclear plan. So you leave us with no option but to turn nuclear on our own. And these days, probably neither China nor Russia will criticize them very heavily for doing it. So it's a sensitive situation. We probably will do something, even if just for Netanyahu to protect his reputation, talking so much about Iran and do nothing when it comes to reality. So he might do something symbolic that probably does not serve effectively the interest, but probably the short-term PR interest of Israel.
Yeah. We're running out of time, but I have two more questions for you. Can you briefly describe your view of the Abraham Accords? How important? How important are they, do you believe? And what are the prospects, do you think, of an Israeli-Saudi public relationship or normalization?
I think that it's important. Every widening of our relationship, it's not exactly peace agreement as Netanyahu tried to describe it. I find a new formula to make peace agreement without dealing with any basic issue. We had a very intimate relationship with almost all of them for decades. I was a generation ago Minister of Foreign Affairs. I met with all these people along the years many times, including with Saudi. It legitimizes, it can go out of the closet and make it walking in unter the linden with your mistress. That's kind of. So it's good, and I hope that it will spread. But we have to understand that it doesn't even cancel the need to pay attention to the Palestinians.
Yeah,
they might have very good relationship with Israel, but when there are a kind of improper behavior over the Temple Mount, they immediately respond. It's not coincidence that they did not, even NBC did not even invite Netanyahu to visit. So we cannot put on it more than, I don't expect anyone to shoulder by shoulder to fight without physically against Iran.
Yes.
And I expected all the time that they play, I used to say they are very trained in dancing, not just on two weddings simultaneously, but half a dozen. And they still follow the same, but it's better to have this open relation. It has a huge economic potential, and I hope that we will be capable of treating it properly.
Two more questions for you. You've been very generous with your time. First, on the issue of the U.S.-Israeli relationship. It's special and has been special for decades because the alignment of values and interests makes it a pretty unique relationship. Are you concerned at all that the relationship is now under greater stress because we don't appear to be on the same page with the current Israeli government on values, and even some of our interests are diverging as well. Are you worried about the U.S.-Israeli relationship?
Yeah, I'm worried. I see that this government brought it to the lowest ebb in generation, probably in 2 generations.
Yes.
It started for no reason. It started in 2015 with no reason whatsoever. I proposed it then to Netanyahu. I told him there is not even a 1% chance that you will change American policy by fighting the president within his own body politics. At the same time, we can share our rejection of this agreement by going and talking to Americans. We know all those of the 538 members of the two chambers, 90%, 85% of them, we know, all those who support it. We can talk to them. We do not have to hide the fact that we think that it's better, but we cannot do it as a state of Israel. We can do it only as human beings. So he made many mistakes. Then he repeated other mistakes by not even thinking of plan B for the case in 2018. You go out of the agreement, arrange some plan B. So I think that he brought it to very low, and he made it partisan. In the past, we had ups and downs. I remember still sitting in front of by Shamir and the Arends and in front of Jim Baker and contest with him about the guarantees, long guarantees.
Yes.
We had ups and downs, but we have always enjoyed bipartisan support. And Bibi seems to open-eyed to destroy it for no reason and against the interests of Israel. I don't think that it's impossible to correct, but some of the damage is irreversible, both with the American non-Jewish communities and even with the Jewish community, and especially I'm worried about the young generation. I was a graduate student in the United States in Stanford from a generation and a half ago. At the time, we have a huge support for Israeli case. I come now to the same universities, Ivy League University. I get always a demonstration, Ehud Barak, murderer, what are you doing to Palestinians? And those demonstrators are not just Palestinians, there are some Jews and some former Israelis. Very colorful.
Yes. Okay, final question, Mr. Prime Minister. I think this is your quote. Whether it's your quote or not, I've heard you say it, that a pessimist is an optimist with experience.
Yeah.
Okay? Pessimist is an optimist with experience. I have 2 grown children, they're in their 40s. I mean, when it comes to the Middle East, even though my own analysis is pretty negative, I can't say never to them. We occupy a small place on the planet for a very short period of time, and we can't predict the future. And I know you remain hopeful. So if I were to ask you to close our session with why you are hopeful, not just for the security and democracy of the state of Israel, but for the U.S.-Israeli relationship, and perhaps most important, for some resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem. What hope and wisdom can you share with us?
Well, first of all, I tell you there are more than one quotation about the difference between the pessimist or optimist. Another alternative is Churchill's famous one. The difference is that the pessimists see the difficulties within any opportunity, the optimists see the opportunity within any difficulty. So I don't deny the difficulties. Middle East remain tough neighborhood, nothing to compare to the Midwest. Yes. No mercy for the weak, no second opportunity for those who do not protect. But we are the strongest country, 1,000 miles around Israel. When on any, not just military strategy, but also technologically, culture, whatever. So we should act out of self-confidence and strength, and be open. We don't have big oceans, we don't have Canada and Mexico both sides, but we still have enough margin of strength, and for sure with the support of the United States, it becomes easier. We can take the risk to try to work consistently toward a better situation and have the courage of conviction to do it, the leadership or the readiness to take tough decisions and the strength to execute them, even if our own people doesn't agree at the same time. It's basically, it needs it needs certain kind of, how to say it, ripeness on both sides and pressure of circumstance and some tailwind from the world. But the moment comes, there will be leadership, and I'm optimistic that it will be solved.
You know, final comment. Jack Kennedy, President Kennedy, was the last U.S. president that had an emotional impact on me. I was only 12 when he was murdered. But Jack Kennedy described himself as an idealist without illusion. And I forgive me, but I think I would say, Ehud Barak, that you are an idealist without illusion. And I think, frankly, that's a terrific place to be, because we have a lot of work to do. We can't give up, but we have to go through that process, that work with our eyes wide open.
So I want a last quotation for Shimon Peres. He used to say, Shimon Peres used to say, I noticed that the optimists and the pessimists are dying at the same day for the same reason. So why the hell to spend your life being a pessimist?
That's pure wisdom. Ehud Barak, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. And
thank you, Aaron, and thank all those who spend the time to look at us.
Yes. Safe travels and be well.
And thanks to Catherine.
Absolutely. Always thanks to Catherine and Tim.